Little Tracy is a truly unique character in the modern underground scene, which is a claim I make a lot, I know, but when it comes to Tracy, it couldn't be more true. Whether you're talking about his heavy influence on the emo rap wave of music, or honestly the underground culture as a whole, because he really was the first one to take on that vamp persona all the way back in 2013. And for those of you who are counting, that's 7 whole years before Playboi Carti took on that persona, and even a couple years before Space Ghost Perp started to run with it.
I don't give a fuck about being crazy, nigga. I was born like that, nigga.
And on top of that, he's influenced some of the biggest names in hip-hop right now, with people like Juice WRLD looking up to him, Playboi Carti, and even weird ones that you wouldn't expect like Lil Nas X. But once you begin to look past his influence, you notice something kind of strange about Tracy, and that's the fact that he seems to both be an extreme overachiever and underachiever at the exact same time. Because on one hand, he's made it a lot farther than most people probably would have expected when he started off. I mean, he surpassed many of his peers like Black Cray as well as Curb Lagoop, but at the same time, he never really made it to that mainstream level that would have been attainable at one point in his career. And many of his fans will actually claim that he did this on purpose. I mean, after all, he's an underground artist. He probably wanted to stay underground. He didn't want a big label telling him what to do. But what they don't realize is that he's actually been signed to a label since 2020. Now, I believe the reason that Tracy never reached the levels that he wanted to is simply down to the fact that he wanted to have his cake and eat it too. He definitely wanted all the fame that would come with that level of success, with him feeling like he was an early pioneer in the SoundCloud genre, and because of that, people should have respected him more than they actually do. But at the same time, he wasn't willing to play nice with many of the artists that he would have had to get to that level. And not only would he reject many big opportunities for his career, he would actively fight with the people who could have helped him get to that next level in countless petty beefs that never really needed to happen. From the years between 2017 to 2019, he was basically acting as a low-rent Tekashi 6ix9ine, which funnily enough is another artist that he actually inspired. And as we already know, in a collaborative medium like making music, you can't fight with everybody around you and expect to get to the top. But despite that, Tracy still has carved out a pretty decent lane for himself within the underground scene. So without further ado, let's look at the life, career, come up, and eventual stagnation of Little Tracy, also known as Young Bruh, also known as Young Karma, Ebis the Dolphin, and countless other names. Jazz Ishmael Butler was born on October 3rd, 1995 in Teaneck, New Jersey, to two very famous parents. And we're not talking about Cemetery having a dad who worked on the soundtrack of the first Pokemon movie levels of fame here. Little Tracy's parents were actual R&B royalty, with his father Ishmael Butler joining a gospel group in the late 80s that would eventually turn into an R&B group known as Diggable Planet, which combined genres of rap and jazz together into a pretty unique style for the early 90s.
Cool like that, I'm cool like that, I'm cool like that, I'm cool like that.
And because of this unique sound, they have become incredibly popular, getting multiple charting hits on the Billboard Hot 100, as well as even winning a Grammy for the Best R&B Performance in 1994. And even after his time with the group came to an end, he would go on to have a very successful career as a professional songwriter, which is what he was doing around the time that Little Tracy was born. And when it comes to his mother, Cheryl Elizabeth Gamble, better known by her stage name Akoko, she might be even more successful than his father, with her also being part of an R&B trio known as Sisters with Voices, which became very successful all through the 90s, getting multiple charting hits as well as many Grammys to their name as well. And in fact, she was still pretty well at the height of her career around the time that Tracy was born, meaning that he spent a lot of his early years either on tour buses or plane trips all across the country whenever she was on tour. So you would think that his childhood would be a breeze. I mean, after all, his parents are rich, they're very successful in the music industry, probably opening doors for him later in his life for him to be a musician as well. But just like many famous couples, his parents wouldn't stay together all that long, with them being fully divorced by the time that he was 5 years old, and his mother finding a new man in Virginia when he was only 8. And this meant that his mother would pack up and move the family out of New Jersey for good, with Tracy spending most of his formative years on Virginia Beach, which was a pretty safe area while also being a pretty boring one. The area was primarily populated by surfers and hippies, which definitely aren't the worst types of people to be around, but Tracy would often have to find his own fun if he wanted things to do, with him playing a lot of basketball at the local court, as well as teaching himself how to skateboard around the age of 10. And while he would spend a pretty decent amount of time at the local skate parks teaching himself different tricks, more often than not he would simply skate around the area, graffitiing different buildings, which eventually got him into a bit of trouble. And basically anytime Tracy found himself in trouble during his childhood, his mother would ship him off to Seattle to stay with his father, which probably wasn't the best parenting technique considering the fact that he basically felt like he wasn't wanted by his mother, and then once his father sent him back he felt like he wasn't wanted by his father. But despite that, Tracy really liked spending time with his father, with him showing him many different styles of music that he had never heard before, as well as teaching him about the music making process at a very early age. However, most of the time that Tracy was in Seattle was spent on the PS2 playing games like Tony Hawk Pro Skater as well as GTA San Andreas, which both had licensed soundtracks. It was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater that would really introduce him to the punk rock style of music, the main genre that he would listen to during his teenage years, with him being a huge fan of bands like the Casualties and the Pins. And it was GTA San Andreas that would introduce him to a lot of his early hip-hop influences, with artists like Waka Flocka, OJ the Juice Man, Gucci Mane, and most importantly Soulja Boy, who was really a pioneer when it comes to online hip-hop. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was people doing it before him, but he was the one that really made it popular. And this would eventually lead Tracy to also join the online world, with him scrolling through early social media like YouTube, MySpace, and Tumblr. And this is where he would discover many different subcultures that he never was aware of before, with him starting to watch some anime from the early 90s, as well as discovering the witch house genre of music, which at the time was not popular at all, and even to this day it's still pretty underground. On top of that, he would also discover an artist known as Little B, which if you don't know about him, he's basically the grandfather of the modern day underground. I mean, I said it in my Peep video, it's either him or Chief Keef, but after reading through most of the comments on that video, I think everybody's basically universally agreed on Little B, so Little B it is. And it was through Little B that he would discover a little known Swedish rap group called Sad Boys, which was comprised of members like Young Lean, Blade, Tyboy Digital, and Echo 2K. And while Tracy definitely was a big fan of all of these artists, it wasn't until he discovered Black Cray and Goth Money Records that he fully decided to commit himself to becoming an artist. Because while it was definitely cool for him to see teenagers on the other side of the world really turn this internet style of music into a full-on career, it wasn't until he saw it in his own backyard, with Black Cray also being from Virginia, that he was fully inspired to start making music on his own. So he would immediately download GarageBand and start trying to make his own makeshift beats, as well as recording his own vocals on a very shitty microphone that his father lent to him. However, all of his earliest music that he made around the age of 15 is no longer available online in any capacity, and the earliest stuff that we do have from him was actually created back in Virginia once he moved back in with his mom. And once he did arrive back in Virginia, he wasn't any more well behaved than when he left. In fact, he only got worse, with him starting to dabble with drugs like weed, shrooms, and acid, as well as getting his first ever face tattoo at the age of 15.
My first tattoo ever.
And Tracy didn't even try to pull the age-old trick of getting your mother's name as your first face tattoo. He would instead actually get a cross tattooed on his cheek, and then he would get the Coco tattoo quite a bit later on. And I probably don't have to point out that his mother was not happy with him, with her even airing him out on her own reality TV show called Sisters with a Voice Reunited, where she would talk about all the troubles that she was having with her son, which definitely had to be kind of shitty for Tracy. I mean, imagine getting in trouble for vandalizing a wall, getting arrested, and then your mother's talking about it on live TV to an audience of millions of people. Once again, very questionable parenting techniques, but either way, it didn't seem like this deterred Tracy from getting into trouble whatsoever, with him vandalizing walls over and over and over again, getting in trouble with the law for selling weed in middle school, as well as, well, a bunch of vandalism charges. But without fail, every single time that he got in trouble, he would avoid jail time, meaning that he never really faced any consequences for his actions, and because of that, he would just continue to do it over and over again. And by the time that Tracy was old enough to go to high school, he was such a troubled teen that his mother would actually put him in a specialty high school with a bunch of other underachieving kids, which only really gave him more bad influences. But despite that, Tracy was actually able to find a pretty solid friend group, with him showing them a lot of his early music that he created under his first ever persona called Light Skin Rasta. For a long time, fans of Little Tracy thought that his first ever moniker was actually Ebis the Dolphin. but it turns out that he had one even before this, even though there's not a whole lot of information around this name. All we really know about this era in early 2010 is that Tracy was mostly recording music at his friend's house, which meant that he was only really able to put music out once in a while, as at the time he didn't have a home studio, and all of his earliest music was actually uploaded on MySpace, with the first ever recorded Tracys Song being called MySpace Song, although I really doubt that he called it that at the time. This track is of course lost to history, and we have absolutely no information about it, besides the fact that many of Tracy's friends at the time compared his music to Curb Lagoop, so apparently Tracy sounded like Curb Lagoop back in 2010. The only other track that we know about from around that time was called #Based, which goes to show that he was really a big fan of Lil B at the time. Well, him and everybody else in the underground, let's be honest. In fact, he was such a fan of him that he would take on the persona of Based Boy Butler, creating a Facebook account under the same name and dropping a little bit of music on there during 2011. However, unfortunately his time in high school wasn't very long lasting, as he actually ended up getting caught trying to cut open a pack of Swishers with a switchblade, with him dropping it on the floor by accident, which of course alerted the teacher, and after they realized that he brought a weapon to school, they would expel him, which of course led his mother to once again send him back to Seattle to enroll in a high school there, although he would only make it about halfway through his freshman year before he once again ended up dropping out. After that, it's assumed that he would return back to Virginia, although it is kind of confusing when he was in Seattle and when he was in Virginia, although it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. All you really need to know is that after 2011 came to an end, he would abandon the Bass Boy Butler name, taking on a new persona called Ebis the Dolphin, and instead of being based, he was now a hippie. This was around the time that he really started doing acid hardcore, which made him fall in love with the earth while also hating people, basically average hippie stuff, nothing really too special there. He would write poetry, talk about how he hated the government and racism, how materialism was bad and being one with the earth was good. He would also drop more music under this alias, I assume on either Tumblr or MySpace, although once again we can't really find any of his early music, although I was able to find one track on a very old YouTube channel from about 15 years ago. This channel is called Zella Media Music and the track is called ZM Knowledge, so if you want to listen to a very early Little Tracy track, I'll make sure to put a link in the description below if you want to give it a listen yourself, but I will play a little snippet of it right here. It was also around the same time that he would create his first ever Bandcamp account, which was basically SoundCloud before SoundCloud, except it didn't really have an algorithm. He also ended up joining his first ever online collective around this time, going by the name of Star Trek, which was comprised of a bunch of producers and rappers that have basically been lost to history at this point, but really all you need to know about them is that they were a bunch of hippies who like to do acid, so Tracy fit right in. And the collective also ran a blog around the time where they ended up doing an interview with Little Tracy called The Black Weirdo, where he would talk about his early career, how he had been making music for about 2 years at this point, and once again, hippie stuff. Throughout the years of 2012 to 2014, Tracy would change his name multiple different times. He would go from Ebis the Dolphin to Persian Dolphin to Ebis the Persian to Ebis the Persian Dolphin to Dolphin X. After that, he would change it to Young Karma and then over to Soulja Witch, which was actually his first ever name that he used when he created his first MySpace account, although he didn't create any music under that alias at the time. Before he finally settled on Young Bruh sometime in 2013, although he would flip back and forth between the other names from time to time, but for the most part after this, Young Bruh would be his main name. It was also the same year that he ended up dropping his first ever music video, going by the name of Symbols of Science on a channel called One the Science One, where he also ended up uploading his first ever mixtape, which is called Cascadia Vibes. However, both of these are now lost to history because the entire YouTube channel got deleted sometime in 2014, and the only reason we even know about them in the first place is because some pretty hardcore fans were able to track the links back on his old Facebook account. Trying to find any of Young Bruh's music prior to 2015 is like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but despite that, some very dedicated fans have managed to do so shout out to them. However, things do get a little bit more straightforward after May of 2014, with his oldest available project still up online going by the name of Indigo Souls, and you can actually listen to this right now if you wanted to. And surprisingly, despite the age of this project, project and how old Tracy was when he recorded it, it actually sounds pretty similar to the style of music that he made once he got popular.
Everywhere I go, people say I smell like smoke. Every hoe I know, she say I smell like smoke.
Although to be honest, the vocal mixing is definitely pretty shit, but Little Peep also really struggled with trying to get his vocal mixing right early on in his career, and once Tracy got a little bit more practice, he was finally able to refine it into his signature style, which I really do find pretty impressive that even this early on, he already knew what style of music he wanted to make, and he had a vision for what it would sound like. It seems like most underground artists start off by doing basic boom bap rap before then switching over to a different style and then another one before finally landing on the type of music that they want to make, but it seems like Little Tracy really knew what he wanted to make right from the start. Now, if only he was so sure about his rap name, because after this he would end up changing it again, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Because it was also around this time that his mother was finally fed up with him. She was tired of him staying in his room all day, doing acid and psychedelics, spending all of his time on his computer, not trying to get back into school, not trying to find a job. And even with her sending him away to Seattle constantly, he would always come back even worse than when she sent him in the first place, so they would end up fighting almost every day. And this finally pushed Tracy to the point that he no longer wanted to live with his mother, so he ended up running away from home, stealing a tent from a local store, and then moving into the woods with a couple of his friends. And it was only at this point that he would end up getting his own home studio, or I guess you could call it a homeless studio, because he would basically steal a MacBook as well as a really shitty mic that he was able to record music on within the tent. And the only reason that Tracy was even able to survive like this is because there was a local park which had a fountain that people would often throw change into, so every night he would sneak in, steal all the change, and then take it and buy some food at McDonald's. And once he sat down at a booth, he was able to plug in his laptop, getting it fully charged, before then returning to the tent to record more music and rinse and repeat every day for a couple months. And this definitely doesn't seem like the choice that most rich kids with famous parents would want to make. I mean, after all, if Tracy had actually tried in school and really kept ahead of his classes, by the time he graduated, I'm sure his mom would have been able to help him break into the music industry. But at the same time, it makes way too much sense. I mean, after all, when you have all the money in the world growing up, money doesn't really mean anything to you. Not to mention Tracy was a very rebellious kid who really looked up to all these SoundCloud rappers, all these teenagers who really had nothing to their name besides their music, really making a go at breaking into the industry and maybe making it big. I mean, I know it doesn't make sense to somebody like me and you who never really had money like that, but it seems to be a pretty common trend that rich kids like to cosplay poverty because after all, they never really lived that life before, just like me and you never lived a rich life before. However, they always got that blanket of their parents' protection, so they're never really in any danger. But surprisingly, Tracy would continue to live this lifestyle for quite a few years, although he wouldn't stay in the woods all that long, because soon after the release of his next mixtape called the Depression Mixtape, he would actually get noticed by Curb Lagoop, who would reach out to him to create a song together. This track was known as Rare and would actually appear on Curb Lagoop's project Florida Boy, which also had features from people like Ruben Slick, who are pretty influential in the Florida underground. And this would give young bruh his first little bit of exposure in the underground, with him actually getting reached out to by a producer that he had previously met at the age of 15, going by the name of Ned Arb. And it turns out that he had recently joined a collective in Seattle going by the name of Thrax House that was founded by members Magnet and Kiyata, who were pretty big in Seattle at the time. And after Ned Arb asked Tracy if he wanted to join, he would of course say yes, because after all, anything was better than living in a tent in the woods, and he would end up taking a plane ticket to Seattle to become part of the group. And you can even find a video from March of 2015 where Little Tracy is seen hanging out with all the other members of Thrax House, so he might have actually ended up visiting there before he became a full-on member. Once he arrived, he ended up meeting many of the artists that would later go on to form Goth Boy Clique, with Coldheart, Horsehead, Fishnark, Wiccaface Springs Eternal, and Magnet. However, at this point, Goth Boy Clique was nothing more than a clothing brand that many of the members of Thrax House would rep, and wasn't a full-on collective until a couple years later. In July 2014, Tracy would drop his next project going under a new alias called Asaku Fox. Now apparently this wasn't actually a name change and was instead meant to be another persona. Apparently he was trying to portray himself as an anime character, but I'm not really terminally online enough to really understand what that means, but either way he ended up dropping one project under this alias called Asaku's Forest, and then after that he ended up moving on from it completely. Probably for the best, because I definitely think that's the worst name that he ever came up with. This project would also include a feature from another terribly named rapper called Ant Wiggins, who would later go on to be known as Little Raven, who's actually Tracy's blood cousin. This track is called Backwood Music, and it's actually one of the better songs from Tracy's early catalog, although I do kind of feel like Little Raven ruined it a bit on the feature, but either way, pretty solid. And only a couple days after that project, he ended up dropping his next one, going by the name of Icy Robitussin, which is definitely a fan favorite in his early catalog, so it seems like Tracy was on a roll at this point. And one of the tracks off of this project, going by the name of Eternal, would actually get a very amateur music video, which once again was deleted by Tracy for unknown reasons, although it has since been re-uploaded onto a channel called Ebis and now sits at over 600,000 views. So it's needless to say that the rarity of Young Bruh's old music most likely creates more of a demand for it, which is unfortunately something that Tracy can't really capitalize on now, because unfortunately, just like many other members of Gothboy Clique, many of his early tracks use a lot of samples that aren't cleared, meaning that if he wanted to upload any of those on Spotify, he would have to go through quite a bit of legal trouble. After releasing this project, he'd make his first trip to LA in hopes of making more connections with other underground artists, with him bouncing back and forth between the Thrax House headquarters and random couches all over California. And this was definitely a very chaotic time in his life, with him sleeping on couches alongside Ned Arb, Coldheart, and Wiccaphase, as well as doing several different types of drugs, because at this point he had upgraded from acid to full-on codeine as well as coke. However, on the bright side of things, he was actually able to form quite a few connections, and he got some pretty decent underground features on his next project, which went by the name of Emotions, but the way it's spelt, you could also say that it's called Emo Ocean. It doesn't really matter what way you say it, because either way, people are going to tell you that you're wrong, so you might as well say it the way you want to say it. With him landing a feature from Eddie Baker of Team Sash, as well as Sick Boy Rari, which was the alias that Black Cray was going under at the time. So it seems like that might have been another way that Cray actually inspired Tracy, with him changing his name constantly as well. But either way, it must have been a very cool feeling for Tracy to finally get to meet his hero in real life for the first time. And not only that, but be able to make music with him as well, with the track they made together called Goth Ritual still being a fan favorite even to this day. And it wasn't long after this project dropped that Thrax House began to become a little bit oversaturated, with constant new artists coming in, leaving, and too many different styles of music all conflicting with each other. So all of the more emo-focused artists like Coldheart, Horsehead, and Wiccaphase Springs Eternal would leave to form their own collective known as Gothboy Clique, with Tracy deciding to go along with them because even though he wasn't really an emo rapper at the time, he definitely aligned himself more with them than he did with the other members of Thrax House. Not long after that, Tracy and Coldheart ended up dropping a collaboration EP called Vampire Project, which might actually be the first mention of vampires when it comes to Tracy's career. There's a possibility that he called himself a vamp even before this, but either way, this was 2014, 3 whole years before Space Ghost Perp ended up taking on the moniker, and once again, way before Playboi Carti started calling himself a vampire. A title that Tracy would become way too proud of later on in his career, but for right now, it was a pretty unique moniker. After the Coldheart project, he would connect to another emo artist that wasn't actually part of Gothboy Clique, going by the name of Little Soda Boy, with the two of them dropping a track together called Like the Sun. At the time, the two of them were only friends over Facebook, but they would eventually end up meeting each other in real life, and Little Soda Boy would actually be pretty influential on Young Bruh's early career. It's also just kind of cool that the two of them got to know each other before either one of them blew up, because if you don't know about Soda Boy, he's also a very influential artist in the underground scene. I have a whole video on him if you want to watch it, but for right now, let's get back to Tracy. Once 2015 kicked off, Tracy would immediately land a pretty high profile feature with Ruben Slick on the track I don't really know how to actually say it. It's basically one of those emoji faces, but it's made out of U's. Not long after that, Tracy would go on to drop his next project, going by the name of Elegant Angel, with the most notable track on this project being called Pink California, featuring Horsehead. And this is also the first project that he ended up dropping on his SoundCloud account that he still uses nowadays, although there was another version that he would drop on Bandcamp, which included 2 extra songs, which goes to show that Tracy was willing to innovate and try out the new app, but wasn't fully willing to give up on Bandcamp yet, although at this point in 2015 it was becoming more and more irrelevant and SoundCloud was becoming the platform that every single new artist was popping off from. After that, in February, Tracy and Mackin would drop a song together called Mansion on the West Side, where strangely enough, Tracy would once again return to his Soulja Witch persona, only to go right back to Young Bruh immediately after that. A couple weeks after that, he would then get the chance to appear on Icy Twat's project Dior Junts on the track Samsung Shoddy, which would become one of his most popular songs on SoundCloud, SoundCloud, with it also being Lil Yachty's favorite Tracy track, which will become important later on, so remember that. After that, in March, Tracy and Ned Arb would end up doing a show together, which I believe could actually be Tracy's first ever show, although it is possible that he had one before this that wasn't filmed, but either way, it's the earliest show that's still uploaded online now, which would help him out a little bit in the money department because after all, his songs weren't really streaming that well on SoundCloud, and there's no way that he was making any more than a couple $100 a month. So with him doing shows all over LA as well as Seattle, he was probably making at least enough to get by, with him still couch hopping from place to place and having money to buy more drugs. It was also this month that he dropped his next mixtape, When Angels Cry, as well as hopping on a track with a bunch of other members of Thrax House called Hem Diddies, showing that he was still somewhat part of that collective while also being part of Goth Boy Clique. In July, he ended up dropping another project, which honestly I'm not even going to try to read out. You can look at it for yourself and see what you think it says, with the most notable track off of this project being called Why Die Live, featuring Curb Lagoop. After that, he would then get the chance to meet Little Soda Boy in real life, with the two performing together in Seattle. And after the performance was over, they'd pool all the money that they had between the two of them to buy a box of cigarettes that they split, showing just how down bad they were at the time. After that, he would then drop a track with Slug Christ called Number One Knows I'm There, which was then followed up by a compilation mixtape of all of his prior music that he uploaded on Bandcamp called Vintage LSD Compilation. In September, he would drop a short EP called Heaven's Witch that was actually produced by Little Soda Boy, fun fact. And Tracy would also go on to feature on Little Soda Boy's next project called Carbonation on the track Sand Angels, once again showing that the two of them had a pretty close connection. And then in October, he would end up hopping on a track with Adam Killa called Futuristic Vintage Freestyle. Now I know nowadays Adam Killa is only known for being a goofy Instagram guy, but back in the day he actually was a respectable artist that ran with people like Young Lean and Blade, which meant that Tracy was now one step further to actually getting on a track with Young Lean, which once again would have been a dream come true for him, although that never ended up happening. In November, Goth Boy Clique ended up dropping the lead single off of their first collaboration mixtape called Yeah It's True, with the track being called All Black Fit, although for one reason or another it never ended up appearing on the project. This was also around the time that Macnin full on gave up on Thrax House and decided to become a member of Goth Boy Clique as well, with them taking in more members like JP Dream Thug, Yawns, and Doves. This was also around the time that Young Bro would drop a track called Little Tracy, with him starting to take on that nickname more and more. There's no real deep meaning behind this name. It mostly came down to the fact that he would wear the same Tracy McGrady jersey every single day, leading many people to call him Tracy, and then eventually he would also add the little onto it. Although the Young Bro name would live on a little bit after this point, although unfortunately he would soon have to drop it, seeing as how there was actually a rapper from the 90s who had the rights to the Young Bro name, and if he wanted to drop any music on Spotify, he was going to have to come up with something different. After that, in December 2015, he would drop one more project called Bayboy.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Ain't right.
As well as landing a feature on 90s Bambino's project called Gucci Chambers on the bonus track called Midnight Sunday, which would form a short-lived connection between the two. If you don't know about 90s Bambino, apparently they were kind of like Cemetery before Cemetery, although eventually they became kind of a crash out. And you would think that would be all that Tracy dropped throughout the entire year 2015, but he actually ended up sneaking in one more project on the final day, December 31st, called Kim and Kanye, which honestly isn't his best work, but well, it at least proves that he definitely had a pretty solid work ethic during that time. So pretty similarly to Little Peep, 2015 was definitely Tracy's freshman year. I mean, he had been making music in 2013 and 2014, but he wasn't really known until this year, and then 2016 would become the year that he really started to gain a buzz. Although he definitely did have a bit of a head start on Peep, because after all, Peep had only been making music at his mom's house and had never really been out to LA and met up with people in real life, while Tracy had been living house to house for a couple years at this point. And once the year 2016 started off, Tracy would once again get a pretty good opportunity to work with an underground legend going by the name of High C, with the two of them making a track together called Surf's Up. After that, he would do an entire collaboration project with 90s Bambino called Vampire Spending Money, which definitely wasn't the best idea considering the fact that 90s Bambino actually produced every single track off of this project. At the time, it wasn't really a big deal, but once Tracy really started to take off with Peep in late 2016, 90s Bambino would become extremely jealous, saying that Tracy didn't properly credit them and hadn't given them any royalties, with Bambino even trying to sue Tracy at one point over ownership, which really doesn't make any sense when you consider the fact that every single beat off of this project uses a sample that wasn't cleared, so I don't think Bambino really has the rights, and Tracy didn't either, not to mention that neither of them really had any money at that point, so I don't know what they were going to be suing with, but either way, they ended up not being friends after that. Bambino is an entire rabbit hole on its own, maybe I'll cover that in another video, but for right now, let's get back to Tracy. That February, Tracy actually ended up getting locked up for vandalism. Apparently this time he wasn't able to beat the charge and he actually ended up going to prison for at least a couple weeks. During this time, his then girlfriend ended up putting out a mixtape called Free Tracy Campaign, going to show that he was mostly going by the Tracy name at this point and had given up on young bruh. And it was actually this project that would get Tracy his first public acknowledgement by Little Peep, with him shouting him out on the track called Beat It, with him saying Free Tracy. This track also appeared on a joint mixtape that NetArb and Peep made together called California Girls, showing that Tracy and Peep were only growing closer together at this point. And as soon as Tracy got out, he ended up dropping a collaboration project with Horsehead called Desire, before finally getting to meet Little Peep in real life in May of 2016. Now for context, Peep had recently left his own collective Schema Posse, had gotten the Crybaby tattoo on his head, and was a huge fan of Little Tracy. And after NetArb ended up connecting the two of them at the Pasadena house, you would think they would have a lot to talk about, but apparently they exchanged very few words and would immediately hop in the studio and record a track together. This track was called White Tea and would be the final time that Little Tracy ever used the Young Bruh moniker. I mean, there probably was a couple times after that he did a one-off thing, but at this point he was fully Little Tracy. And only a couple days after that, the track would get a music video, with it immediately blowing up online and everybody in the underground talking about this new duo of Little Tracy and Little Peep. Unfortunately though, even though they became fast friends, they definitely weren't living in the best environment, because Peep actually ended up getting kicked out of the Pasadena house not long after that because he couldn't stand to live with Craig Zen anymore. So the two of them ended up heading down to Skid Row, where they would basically continue to couch hop from place to place, doing more drugs, getting more fucked up, and for Tracy, this was nothing new, but for Peep, this lifestyle wasn't what he was used to. And while he was willing to put up with it for a couple months, it would start to wear on him over time. However, Tracy didn't really notice any difference, and he would immediately drop another project called Moon Rocks, with the most notable track off of this project being called No Lames, featuring Drippin' So Pretty. This track would actually drop back in April before Tracy met Pete, but he ended up putting it on this album to give it a little bit more buzz, because after all, Drippin' So Pretty was starting to take off at the time. After that, in June, Gothboy Clique would finally drop their collaboration project, Yeah It's True, with Tracy appearing on multiple tracks off of it, including a collab with Horsehead called Los Angeles, and another track with Coldheart called She Fell Asleep, which would officially cement the group as a force to be reckoned with in the modern underground scene. Soon after that, Peep and Tracy ended up dropping their collaboration project called Castles, which included 3 tracks, the title track Castles, Pin featuring Slug Christ, and most importantly, White Wine, which would become a massive hit in the following months. And Peep and Tracy would even end up shooting a music video for this track where they could both be seen rocking Hello Kitty hats, another style that Little Tracy would become heavily protective over. At first, the track wasn't super popular, getting around the same amount of views that White Tea got, but once Witchblades dropped in early 2017, this track would also skyrocket. And even to this day, it's still Little Tracy's second most streamed song on Spotify ever. After that, the two of them would then drop another collaboration track together called Gods, which is definitely one of my favorites from them, although the lyrics don't really make a whole lot of sense. Tracy would explain that during the time that they recorded this track, it was the highest that they've ever been on cocaine, which is not really the vibe that I get from it, but apparently it's true. However, this reckless lifestyle couldn't continue for very much longer, because at this point, Peep was completely fed up with living in a house with multiple other people, all doing drugs, not sleeping for multiple days at a time, and not having a single moment to himself at any point during the entire summer of 2016. With him actually reaching out to his mother and telling her that he didn't know what to do, because after all, he had finally met a true friend. He was making the music that he always wanted to make, but he just couldn't stand the lifestyle anymore. And it was right around that time that a deal with the devil would come in front of him, because the label that he had been working with, First Access Entertainment, would offer him a big amount of money to finally sign a real deal with them, which of course he couldn't turn down. But at first it was great. He ended up buying a place for himself called The Loft, with him and Tracy moving in there and starting to record music on more professional equipment. However, it wouldn't be very long before all those same people from Skid Row would start to show up, and eventually the house became exactly the same as all the other ones that Peep had stayed at. However, on the bright side, he would finally finish his Hellboy mixtape, with Tracy appearing on 3 tracks off of this project as well, called The Song They Played When I Crashed Into the Wall, Walk Away as the Door Slams, and Cobain, which all became massive underground hits, with the Hellboy project going on to do numbers on SoundCloud, and the Cobain track even getting a music video with the two, although Tracy didn't appear in it for very long. And you can start to see that First Access Entertainment was trying to detach Peep and Tracy, with them saying that he was a bad influence that was always bringing drugs around, although the real reason that they didn't like him was actually because they offered him a deal sometime in August, which he ended up turning down. And after the label realized that they couldn't control him the same way that they were controlling Peep, they felt like the best course of action was to cut off their connection altogether, with them often kicking Tracy out of the house when Peep was asleep and once again leaving him on the streets. However, at the time, Tracy wasn't all that offended by this. He would talk to Peep on a couple different occasions, asking if he could stand up to his label, but he did understand the situation that he was in at the time, so he kinda let it go. And for the following months, their relationship would stay on pretty good terms. In October, Tracy ended up dropping a track with Young Goth called Last Summer.
Hey man, you got beef with Young Goth, you got beef with the GBC. This my bro for real.
Gang shit. Fuck you mean?
As well as another track with Little Peep called Backseat, which once again would get a music video that ended up doing numbers, although it never became as big as something like Cobain or White Tea, which honestly probably comes down to the fact that Little Tracy was the primary artist in the thumbnail and that Little Peep wasn't. I mean, at that point, Little Peep was very marketable and Tracy wasn't as much. After that, the two would continue to fire out collaboration tracks together, like Giving Girls Coke, I Crash You Crash, and Kisses in the Wind, with each new track that they dropped growing their infamy more and more within the underground emo rap scene. However, it was around this time that Black Cray started to feel a type of way about Goth Boy Click, with him thinking that they ripped off Goth Money Records and were running off with the style, deciding to drop a track that was called Banned for Life, where he would diss No Jumper, Little Uzi Vert, Little Tracy, Little Peep, and many more, with him basically saying that Little Peep had appropriated the style that he created and that Little Tracy had to come back to Virginia to get his head straight because he was getting way too clouded up and he was starting to lose his mind. Now, Peep never really ended up responding to this. Apparently, he would call Black Cray behind the scenes and the two of them made up, but Lil Tracy would take it in a different direction by hopping on Instagram Live and calling out Cray, although the two of them would make up in 2018, so it doesn't seem like it was all that serious. However, this would start a trend of Tracy crashing out on basically every single artist that he ever worked with, burning bridges with everyone, and having constant bipolar episodes where he would just talk shit before then taking it back. And Tracy actually would respond to this track in musical form in kind of a weird way. Instead of dissing Black Cray, he instead took aim at his girlfriend Cray Sean on his track Cray Sean Diss, which is a very creative name, I gotta say. And all of this would lead up to February 2017, which was definitely the busiest month that Tracy had ever, with him immediately starting it off by dropping a mixtape called Tracy's Manga, which had 2 big features from both Famous Dex on the track Like a Glock and Uno the Activist on the track Rackade, with him beginning to get intertwined with the whole Atlanta scene that was taking off around the time, with people like Lil Yachty, Thousand Man Fawny, and of course Playboy Cardi. And after that project, him and Peep would drop their biggest collaboration track to date, Witchblades, complete with a music video that absolutely took off and got many articles written about the two, or at least that's how it appeared at first, but it turns out that many of these articles really only talked about Little Peep, giving him all the praise and only mentioning Little Tracy offhandedly in a couple sentences. And this is really when Tracy started to feel rubbed the wrong way. I mean, after all, it was bad enough that he was getting kicked out all the time, but now he wasn't even getting noticed for the music that he was making with Peep, and it really felt like Peep was trying to run off with his style, with Tracy once again going to Peep and asking him if he could talk to the label and maybe see if they could write an article about the two of them, or see if there was some way that he could get a little bit more attention, like maybe the two of them could go on a joint tour where they're both headliners. And Peep would agree to this, saying that he would do something to get Tracy's name out there more, but unfortunately he didn't end up delivering on that. However, despite that slight hiccup, he would continue to drop bigger and bigger tracks, getting a collaboration with Kane Groceries of Goth Money Records, showing that him and Black Cray must have been on somewhat good terms at the time, or maybe Kane Groceries went behind his back to make this song, not really sure. As well as dropping a music video for his track Pictures, being the first music video for the track that was later deleted, with the second one being filmed by Lyrical Lemonade. After that, he would drop yet another music video with his cousin Little Raven for the track New, 2, before then finally finishing off February by dropping another collaboration project with Peep called Castles 2, which of course included some of their biggest tracks to date. After that, he would then do a collaboration with Warhol SS on the track Finger the Money, which was then followed up by another collaboration mixtape called Fly Away, which included yet another feature from Lil Peep on the track Oh. Soon after that, Gothboy Click would go on to do an interview on him on Everything, before Peep and Tracy then appeared on a Curb La Goop track called Man Down. On top of that, they would also get Thousand Band Fonny on a track called With This Bitch, which has to be one of the weirdest tracks in Peep's entire catalog.
There's no telling where this Molly in my mouth.
And funnily enough, this song would actually cause a little bit of a beef between Little Tracy and Little Yachty, because at the time, Fonny and Yachty were heavily beefing. Because apparently Little Yachty had recently reached out to Tracy asking him to re-upload Samsung Jumping onto SoundCloud, with Tracy responding saying that he didn't know who he was and he wasn't going to give him the song, with Little Yachty simply responding by sending a screenshot of their prior DMs where Little Tracy was asking him to hop on a song together, which is once again another common trend from Tracy. He ends up asking somebody to hop on a song, they say no, and then he ends up dissing them and acting like he doesn't know who they are. Tracy would drop an entire diss track on Yachty called Yo-Yo, but Yachty never ended up responding to it, as at this point he was already massive and Tracy was still a mostly unknown artist. After that, Gothboy Click would go to the opening of the No Jumper store, where they ended up filming a music video for Tracy's track This Year, with Tracy and Peep also hopping on a No Jumper interview, although unfortunately the audio was lost, so we don't really know what the two of them were talking about. Soon after that, Little Tracy would drop yet another mixtape called XOXO, as well as appearing on Trippie Redd's mixtape A Love Letter to You on the track Limitless, featuring him and Rocket the Goon. And this project was really Trippie Redd's first big breakthrough project, so Tracy being on it was definitely a pretty big opportunity for him. And at this point, it seemed like only a matter of time before he also ended up blowing up in the same way that Trippie was. However, unfortunately, before that got a chance to happen, Little Tracy and Peep's relationship would start to break down, as Peep ended up going on his first solo headlining tour called the Peep Show Tour. And the very first stop off of this tour was in Russia, where Peep would end up performing in front of a massive audience, singing Witchblades for all of them. And of course, with Tracy not being there, he finally had enough of Peep disrespecting him, and he decided to cut the cord once and for all, with him immediately texting Peep and telling him that he was fake, as well as talking shit about him to other members of Gothboy Click, with Gothboy Click mostly taking Peep's side. Weirdly enough though, after this point, they would do 2 more shows together, one at Ham on Everything, as well as a SoundCloud promo show where I don't believe Tracy knew Peep was going to show up. Apparently he came out, performed 2 songs, they had really bad chemistry, the entire thing was very awkward, and fans weren't very happy. However, little did they know this would be the final time that Tracy and Peep would perform together ever. Now, I know a lot of people think that Little Tracy was being pretty unreasonable during this time, and I can kind of understand where they're coming from, but you also have to keep in mind that with Peep being gone on the tour, Tracy had nowhere to stay, so he ended up going back to Skid Row. It was here that he ended up doing more drugs than ever before, with him apparently even dabbling with a little bit of meth. And with him being bipolar, that's definitely not a good combination, which kind of explains the crash out that he would go on in the following years. Despite the falling out though, Tracy would send Peep one final open called Favorite Dress, with Peep hopping on it and filming half of the music video in New York while Tracy was in LA. I got a hot take on this song. I think Tracy's part really sucks, but I think Peep's is pretty good.
I know that you like me. Kiss me with your eyes closed. Kiss me with your eyes closed.
I can see your eyes glow. Kill me in my white tee. Baby, let my blood flow.
After that, in June, Tracy would once again go on No Jumper, this time along several members of Gothboy Click, as well as getting a Lyrical Lemonade video for his track Pictures. And somewhere between those 2 events, he ended up scaring the shit out of Little Pump. Basically, Pump was sitting in a car screaming his head off, and then Tracy and all his boys came out and he looked like he was going to shit himself, which is kind of funny in context when you consider that the 2 of them would have beef later on, but at that point, Pump definitely didn't want any smoke. In July, he ended up dropping another mixtape called Life of a Pop Star, which had some pretty decent underground features with people like Lucky, Doo-Wop Kane, and even Smoke Perp, who at the time was blowing up. That August, the music video for Favorite Dress would drop, followed up by another mixtape called Hollywood High, with Tracy and Peep meeting one final time to film the music video for Awful Things. I'm not really sure when this track was recorded, but I believe it was before Favorite Dress, but it ended up coming out after. And the filming of this music video was an absolute crapshoot, with Tracy showing up completely strung out and not sleeping sleeping for 3 days before that point, with him immediately asking the crew for a bottle of Jameson or he wasn't going to appear in the video at all, and he only ended up appearing in a few short scenes because he was way too strung out to even stand up, with one scene of him flailing his arms around like a helicopter, not really sure what he was doing there. But either way, the video ended up coming out and a lot of people liked it, although once Tracy sobered up and seen that it released, he wasn't happy. He would immediately tweet that it was a garbage song, that he wanted to be taken off every single track that he ever made with Little Peep, and that he didn't fuck with Goth Boy Click anymore and he'd be leaving the collective. This mostly came down to the fact that they were taking Peep's side over his, and he probably felt slighted about that because after all, he had been part of Goth Boy Click since he was 18 and Peep had only recently joined. Soon after that, in October, he would do yet another No Jumper interview alongside Buku Bands and Little Raven, where he basically spent 20 minutes talking shit about Peep and how he stole his style and multiple other bad things. And the entire time that he was doing this, you can tell that Little Raven was trying to get him to say more and more negative about Little Peep, so the people that he had around him at the time were definitely not the best influences. However, it does seem like Tracy had a change of heart sometime in November because he actually wanted to go see Peep on tour and hopefully mend things, although Peep's label wouldn't let that happen, and unfortunately, only a couple days after that, Peep would pass away. And Tracy was actually in the studio at the moment that Peep passed away, and he would immediately go to the bathroom and puke, having a horrible feeling but not knowing why, with him immediately looking online only to see stories that Peep had actually passed away, leading him to tweet out, "Is Gus dead? LOL," which definitely came off as very disrespectful to Peep's fan base, who were looking for blood at that point, trying to hunt down anybody that was associated to Peep and his possible overdose. And to make matters worse, as soon as Tracy got confirmation that Peep actually was dead, he would immediately drop a track between the two called Ratchet Bitches Cocaina, which was actually produced by Diplo, which of course led a lot of people to say that Tracy was trying to clout chase off of his friend's passing, although I'm not really sure if that was true. He was probably feeling guilty and trying to do anything he could at the time to make things good. On another note, I can't believe that Tracy and Peep actually had a song produced by Diplo and Tracy still decided to cut ties with Peep. I mean, if this track had actually come out and got marketed right, it definitely would have been a smash hit and would have hit the billboard. However, negative opinions about Little Tracy wouldn't last for very long, as Peep's mother would actually come out and talk positively about him, which was pretty rare during that time as she was basically coming after everybody. And Tracy would even be spotted a couple days after Peep's passing performing Witchblades live, where he was absolutely crying his eyes out and not able to continue. Which goes to show, despite the issues they had during Peep's life, him passing away really affected Tracy, and after this point he would never be the same again, going on a multiple month-long crash out, which arguably has never ended even to this day. Because of course, once the news that Peep had passed away hit the internet, many fellow SoundCloud rappers wanted to show their condolences, including Lil Pump, XXXTentacion, Lil Yachty, and Trippie Redd. However, Tracy wasn't very happy about this, with him taking issue with all these artists that had never talked about Peep during the time that he was alive, now all of a sudden coming out and saying rest in peace. Taking a shot at Lil Pump, saying that if he didn't make music, he'd be working at a Taco Bell because his music sounded like ass. As well as telling XXXTentacion that he looks like he fights kangaroos in his free time, which I don't really know what that means, but it seems like a diss. Now, I'm not going to get into every single person that Tracy was beefing with around this time, because if I did that, this video would be like 2 hours long, and honestly, I might just make a video on the many beefs of Tracy. But all you really need to know is that he was coming at absolutely everybody, and a lot of these artists were way bigger than him, meaning that he was burning bridges with people that he couldn't really afford to. Because of course, after Little Peep passed away, everybody who was somewhat associated to him got a lot more clout, and with Little Tracy seemingly being his best friend, he would get the most, which would put him in the position where if he really wanted to become a mainstream artist, he probably could do that. All he really needed was a label behind him, a couple big name features, and bam, Little Tracy would be one of the biggest artists in the game. However, Tracy didn't really seem all that interested in working on his career at the time, and would instead continue to crash out on other people around Peep, like Fat Nick, Bexy, and Smoke-a-Sack, who were all hyping up an XXXTentacion and Little Peep collaboration track at the time called Falling Down, which Tracy really didn't agree with, calling them all clout chasers.
25 years, you gon' be working at Shears. Yeah.
On top of that, he would also get into beef with Juice WRLD because he ended up putting out a track called Legends, which was meant to be a tribute to both Peep and X. However, Tracy really took issue with one of the lines that Juice said about Peep, saying last time it was the drugs that he was lacing, seeming to think that Juice was implying that Peep leading Tracy to tweet out, "Fuck Juice WRLD, I don't care," although the two of them would eventually make up, with Juice hopping in his DMs and explaining that he was actually a fan of both Tracy and Peep and that he meant no disrespect, leading the two of them to create a track together called Play Fair, which Tracy would release in October 2018, only for Juice's label to take it down. And besides all the beef that he was getting into online, he wasn't very active when it came to music, only dropping a couple projects in late 2018, dropping one called Designer Talk in October and another called Sinner in November. However, Tracy would drop a track this year that would grow into a big hit. It was actually a collaboration with Lil Uzi Vert on the track called Like a Farmer. Now, I remember being really disappointed when the song came out. I mean, after all, Little Tracy and Lil Uzi Vert on a song together sounds like it would be absolute fire, but instead they ended up creating this weird meme track where they basically talk like country people, and overall it's not very good. However, what Tracy didn't realize at the time is that this track would actually go on to inspire one of the biggest songs of 2019, and honestly one of the biggest songs ever made, with him getting reached out to by Lil Nas X to hop on a little known song called Old Town Road, but Tracy ended up ignoring him. After that, he would continue to crash out by posting a tweet saying that he was basically going to do unspeakable things to his fans at one of his shows, which of course led the police to show up and take him into custody, with him having to stay in a psych ward for the following week, although it didn't really seem to help Tracy out at all, because as soon as he got out, he would immediately start doing drugs again, with him having one particularly bad night where he ended up doing sipping lean and drinking alcohol all at the same time, leading him to have a heart attack and running out of the bar in hopes of getting home. And Tracy definitely would have died that night if it wasn't for the fact that a couple of his fans actually ended up pulling up on him, with him immediately asking them to drive him to the hospital. So in a weird way, him being famous actually would save his life that night, and after that, apparently he eased off on the drugs, but I'm a little bit suspect if that's actually true. And then after that, he finally finished off the year by getting into a beef with DJ Academics, all because Tracy started dating a woman that Academics had previously dated, and with him being a drunken buffoon, he would immediately hop on a live stream and start calling out Tracy. This led the two of them to hop on live together and have an extremely stupid fight about how Little Tracy was still underground and how he would never break through into the mainstream, and then Tracy was screaming and Ack was screaming. They were both probably drunk or on drugs.
Oh, alright, hold on. If you don't give a fuck about that, you wouldn't be trying to cloud chase with a chick. You wouldn't be cloud chasing with a chick, my nigga. You wouldn't be cloud chasing with a chick if you didn't give a fuck about being popping, but you do give a fuck. But you one of the underground niggas. Wait, you one of the underground niggas. You one of the underground niggas who love to. You are underground niggas.
And this probably wouldn't have been a big deal if it wasn't for the fact that DJ Academics is the most petty man alive. And once 2019 rolled around, he would take it a step too far, well, depending what you think about the allegations. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the fallout of Old Town Road coming out, because after December, this track would really start to take off, eventually rising through the Billboard Hot 100 charts and reaching #1, with it getting a million remixes as the year went on, and sitting at #1 for an astonishing 19 weeks in a row, which is actually the longest that any single song is set at #1 ever. So in a way, the stupid meme song is actually the biggest song of all time when it comes to the charts, and Tracy had the opportunity to be on this song. And I mean, I get why he didn't. After all, Lil Nas X wasn't known at all when he asked Tracy to get on the song, so he probably wasn't gonna hop on a track with a random fan, but if he had of, he probably would have been eating off of this song for the rest of his life. So of course, Little Tracy was mad, because if there's one thing that Little Tracy doesn't like in this world, it's somebody stealing his swag. Now I'm gonna be honest with you, Little Tracy is definitely not the first person to mix country with rap, and while Old Town Road probably was inspired by Like a Farmer, I don't really think you could say that it stole anything from the track itself. I mean, for one, Old Town Road is actually good and Like a Farmer is dog shit.
Tripping, bro. You tripping.
But either way, Tracy was not happy, and he decided to call out Lil Nas X, only for Lil Nas to respond with the same DMs from before, showing that he actually wanted to get Tracy on the track. The exact same thing that Lil Yachty ended up doing to him a couple years prior. I'm starting to see a pattern here. So really, Tracy didn't have much of an argument here, but despite that, he would continue to rant on Twitter, posting and then deleting several different tweets. And this would lead him to get in a beef with somebody that you would never expect, because it turns out that the H3 podcast actually ended up talking about this controversy, and Tracy didn't like what they had to say. With Ethan Klein being completely out of touch, calling Little Tracy Vert throughout the entire segment, and basically taking Lil Nas' side.
During Ian's PowerPoint presentation, we had discussed if Lil Nas was guilty of copyright infringement. He was accused of another rapper, Lil Tracy Vert. Am I right? Did I say his name?
No Vert.
No Vert.
Oh, just Lil Tracy?
Just Little Tracy.
That's a different guy.
Oh, he's not the Vert.
Which led Tracy to fire back by saying, "Keep my name out of your mouth, Grandpa." Although apparently he wasn't mad for very long, because soon after that he would then tweet out, "I'm sorry, Grandpa." So that beef fizzled out pretty fast. However, Academics would rear his ugly head once again, and this time he had receipts on Tracy. Because in the summer 2019, allegations would come out against him claiming that he actually assaulted a girl, with Academics taking the chance to post it all over every single one of his social medias, basically painting Tracy out as a which Tracy definitely didn't take very well. I mean, after all, he was already mid-crash out, and with these allegations coming out, he was only going to crash out harder. Because it turns out while most of the members of Goth Boy Clique ended up taking Tracy's side, Horsehead wouldn't pick a side, basically staying in the middle, not saying that he believed the girl, but not really coming out against the allegations, which led Tracy to retaliate by pissing on his porch. I kid you not, that's actually what he did. And apparently after that, they actually ended up kicking Horsehead out of Goth Boy Clique, which says a lot about that collective if that's actually true, but I'm not sure if it is. And this all reached a peak when Little Tracy ended up sending a cease and desist to Academics, basically telling him to take down all of the allegations because he was slandering his name, which definitely didn't make Tracy seem very innocent, with a lot of fans claiming that him sending a cease and desist was actually proof of guilt, although to be fair, I don't think anybody would want stuff like that out about them online. However, luckily for Tracy, this didn't end up sticking in the long run, because after all, Peep fans didn't really care about the situation, and Tracy was too beloved in the underground for people to really take notice. Keep in mind, this was 2019, nobody really cared about allegations like that back then, although another allegation would pop up in the summer 2020, which mostly went unnoticed, so I don't really know one way or the other, but either way, Tracy would recover. And soon after that, Tracy would get the chance to appear on Montreality, where he would hype up the release of his official studio album called Anarchy, which he was kind of describing as a Castles 3, although of course Peep features wouldn't be on the project. I'm also not sure why he called this a studio album, because he wasn't signed to a label at the time, but either way, when the project did finally come out, it ended up being Little Tracy's best body of work to date. It's very reminiscent of the old style that he used to do with Peep, and many people appreciated it because of that. But despite that, Tracy still wasn't making that much money. Almost 6 years later, after moving out of his mom's house to try to make it as an underground rapper, he had gained quite a bit of fame, but the money wasn't really working out, so he decided to fold and finally signed a record deal with Virgin Records in 2020, which had kind of mixed results. I mean, some fans definitely weren't happy about this, saying that he was selling out, while others said that he deserved it with all the work that he put out in the underground. However, I would say that his Anarchy project was really the last time that he was super notable when it came to modern day rap. I mean, he's always been around, he's still doing his thing, doing underground LA shows, but for the most part, people don't really talk about Tracy that much anymore. However, he would continue to truck along throughout the rest of the 2020s, with him dropping a project called Tracy's World with features like Warhol SS and Little Candy Paint, followed up by Designer Talk 2 in November. After that, in 2021, he surprisingly took a break from music, being the only year that he didn't drop a full project in his entire career. In 2022, he would come back with a new collective, which he called Vamp Boy Clique, including members like Casper, Dripping So Pretty, and High C. However, a lot of his fans didn't really like this new collective, saying that it was kind of corny for him to call himself a vampire, as at this point, he was almost 30 years old. And despite the group existing for almost 3 years at this point, they haven't really put out a lot of music together. Instead, Tracy decided to drop another solo project called Saturn's Child, which honestly isn't all that notable in the grand scheme of things, but 2023 was actually a bigger year for him, with him actually getting the chance to appear on the Lyrical Lemonade album, All Is Yellow, on a track alongside Black Cray and Corbin called Hello There. And of course, like every other track off of this project, it would get a music video on the channel, which was honestly pretty dope to see. I mean, at this point, I'm not really a fan of Lyrical Lemonade, as they only seem to put on already mainstream artists, but it was cool for Cole to give a little bit of shine to 3 underground legends like Corbin and Black Cray, as well as Tracy. And honestly, I would say it was this music video that finally got Black Cray all of the respect that he deserved for years, with many people finding out about him and his legacy and how many people he really inspired. However, I wouldn't really say the same thing happened for Tracy, because immediately after the album dropped, he once again went back to the same old thing that he's been doing for years. I mean, he would perform at Summer Smash, Splash, which is definitely a pretty big opportunity, but it does kind of feel like Lyrical Lemonade is the only thing keeping him relevant at this point. After that, in 2023, he would put out a collaboration project with Drippin' So Pretty, which is honestly one of his best albums in a long time, most likely down to the fact that Drippin' So Pretty is a really good rapper. After that, he would drop another collaboration project with Horsehead called Under Your Spell, showing that the two of them must have squashed their beef at some point between 2019 and 2023. And then finally, in 2025, he ended up dropping a project known as Baby Vamp, which apparently is the new persona that he's going to be going under from this point forward, with him constantly fighting with Playboi Carti over who really came up with the Vamp persona, which was kind of a big deal like 8 years ago, but at this point, with both of them being 30 years old, it's kind of like, you gotta let it go. And unfortunately, besides his name popping up in the headlines for fighting with Playboi Carti from time to time, that's basically all that Tracy is doing nowadays. He's still playing the same old shows in LA, he's still dropping countless mixtapes, he's still hanging out with the same old people, and it just seems like he's very stuck. I think a lot of his fans really want to see him grow and change as an artist, starting to make more mature music and maybe switching his style up a little bit, but it seems like he has absolutely no interest in doing that. I mean, he does try to switch it up every once in a while, but for the most part, it's a lot of switchblades, it's a lot of and it's a lot of vampire shit. However, I'm not going to sit here and say that everything is bad for Tracy. I mean, after all, like I said at the start of the video, he made it a lot farther than most people probably would have suspected. Anybody who met Little Tracy between the years of 2015 to 2017 probably would have expected him to end up in the exact same spot as Little Peep, but at least on that account, he has managed to prove everybody wrong, with him seemingly taking on a more healthy lifestyle and really trying to get into a more positive mindset. Not to mention, he's probably still making a lot of money off of all those collaborations with Peep. I mean, pretty recently he actually ended up putting out a video where he showed off all the plaques that he got from those tracks. But in a way, I still find it kind of sad because I always felt like Little Tracy really could have broke out of the shadow of Little Peep and been his own artist. I mean, Peep wasn't so big that that would be an impossible feat, but it seems like Tracy was always trying to self-sabotage himself, starting petty beefs for no reason, and effectively blackballing himself, basically making it so he can't get any bigger in his current career, and he's stuck in this weird middle ground between being too big to be an underground artist but not being big enough to be a mainstream artist. And unfortunately, as he grows older and older, I think that's where Little Tracy is gonna stay, because just like many other people who find fame young, after you get famous there's no real reason to grow anymore, and you basically end up becoming stagnant because there's no real reason to try anymore. He's probably getting just enough money to keep himself comfortable while not really having to have any stress or worry about it, and that's where Tracy wants to be. But despite where he eventually ended up, I still want to give him props for all the influence that he had in the underground scene. I mean, after all, a lot of the style and fashion that we see nowadays wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for Little Tracy pioneering that back in 2015. And I feel like it's really important to shine a light on these types of stories because as more and more young kids come into the underground scene, they're not going to know the history, and as time goes on, it will simply fade away and be forgotten completely. I know everybody loves to talk about how rare something is when it comes to the underground, but eventually rare is going to become completely forgotten, and if people don't try to preserve this history, it's not going to exist anymore. But that's only my opinion on Little Tracy, and I know sometimes you guys say I'm a little bit too negative, so I want to throw it over to Actually Evil for him to give his own opinion on Tracy. So without further ado, take it away.
You ever stumble across an artist and think, how is everyone not obsessed with this person already? Yeah, that's Little Tracy. He's one of those artists that never really needed the spotlight to shine. He's built his own universe made up of a little emo, a little punk, and a little trap, but it's all still heart. His music feels like the late night text you never sent, like skateboarding through your feelings. Tracks like Beautiful Nightmare or Like a Farmer, underrated bangers. This year, that one feels like you're starting your life over with a spliff in your hand. And yeah, obviously he was right by Peep's side making some legendary records as well. White Tea, Witchblades, Castles, come on now. He's been dropping gems for years. Songs that hit you when you're in your bag and your feelings are just floating through life. Yeah, maybe he slept on a bit. Maybe people still think of him as Peep's friend or whatever. But Tracy's been writing his own story this entire time. I'm not even sure if Gus could have reached the heights he did without Tracy. I know that's a hot take, but I'm being for real right now. There's nothing like a friend that's closer to you than a literal brother pushing you to be great and inspiring you the way Tracy did. And yeah, he has some weird allegations in the background, but I'm only here to talk about what he did as an artist, not his flaws as a man. And as an artist, Tracy is a living legend. Shout out Twisted World for having me on, and Peace.
Hence why I made this video. But with all that said, we're about to be to an hour and I don't really want to go a whole lot farther than that. So all I'm going to say is shout out to Little Tracy, rip young bruh, rip little peep. And if you like this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know who you want to see next. I really appreciate all the positive comments on my Peep documentary. And if you guys keep showing up and keep watching them, I'll keep doing them. I think I might do Black Cray next or maybe Lucky. So let me know who you want to see in the comments. And with that said, I will see you in the next one. Peace out. Bye.
Wanna give me a massage in my new garage.